In a dusty, forgotten countryside, two orphaned black sisters lived with their grandmother in a crumbling shack, often turned away simply because of their skin color. One afternoon, on their way home, they came across a middle-aged man struggling with his broken-down car on a deserted road. Without hesitation, the older girl stepped in and fixed it, using a set of rusty tools salvaged from an old shop, then quietly disappeared. They had no idea the man was a billionaire, and his return would change their lives forever. The sun was unforgiving that day. It poured down over the cracked earth like molten glass, baking every rooftop, every tree stump, every half-sunken fence post into submission. In the little town of Marlowe's Edge, time seemed to hang heavy in the air like dust that never settled. A place forgotten by maps, tucked between cornfields and rusting train tracks, where the breeze didn't come unless it was bringing gossip or bad luck. Children didn't play in the streets here. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was pointless. There was nothing to chase, no promise of ice cream trucks or laughter echoing between houses. The old folks sat on porches that groaned under their weight, fanning themselves with church bulletins and watching everything with the still suspicion of people who'd seen too much and changed too little. And when Zaria walked by, they didn't wave. Some squinted, some turned their heads. One woman muttered beneath her breath, "There goes the little troublemaker and her shadow." Her shadow, of course, was Nyla. 7 years old and all legs and questions, perched on her sister's bony back like a backpack that hummed lullabies. Zaria was 13, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had stopped counting birthdays. Her skin was a deep, warm brown that shimmered with sweat and grit. Her braids, uneven and fraying at the ends, were tied back with a faded red ribbon. One of the last things their mama had touched before the fever took her. Zaria's frame was lean, nearly skeletal, her ribs sometimes visible through the loose t-shirt she'd outgrown 2 summers ago. Her shorts hung off her hips like they'd once belonged to someone else. Maybe they had. Everything they owned was once someone else's. She walked with a purpose that didn't belong to kids her age. Her sandals slapped against the dirt in steady rhythm, one hand gripping Nyla's thigh to keep her balanced, the other clutching a threadbare tote filled with scraps, rusted tools, and wild herbs they'd gathered on the way back from town. The town didn't like them much, not because they stole or caused trouble, they didn't, but because they stayed, they survived. "They give me the creeps," the grocer's wife had said once, loud enough for Zaria to hear as she stood barefoot at the corner of the store, holding a nickel and a can of beans, always staring with those ghost eyes like they know something the rest of us don't. And perhaps she did. Zaria didn't flinch at the words anymore. She just took her beans and left. She didn't cry when the hardware store owner, a stout man with pink cheeks and yellow teeth, slammed his window shut the moment he saw her approaching. She didn't ask why the church turned them away last winter when they needed blankets. She just walked on, always forward. Most afternoons, when the heat began to crawl inside houses and make even the dogs too lazy to bark, Zaria would carry Nyla to the old service station on Willow Road. It was half shop, half junkyard, owned by a man named Ray. He was one of the few who didn't spit words like knives. Ray had lines around his mouth from chewing sunflower seeds, and his hands were always black with grease. He let the girls hang around sometimes, let Zaria hold the tools and watch him work on busted engines. She never asked for anything. Ray would grunt, hand her a screwdriver, and say, "Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty," but it never lasted long. His wife, Miss Pauline, always found a reason to send them away. "They're not your kids, Ray," she'd hiss from the porch. "They don't belong here. They're not like us." That day, like many others, Zaria had scooped up the discarded tools Ray didn't want, handed one to Nyla to hold like treasure, and disappeared before the next insult could land. There was no place for them in this town. No one wanted to make room, but Zaria wasn't waiting for permission. She had a mind that noticed things. A wire out of place, a sound that didn't belong, the way engines coughed right before dying. And she had a heart that didn't ask for much, just the strength to get her sister home before dark, and maybe, just maybe, enough fuel in her soul to survive another day. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the hills, melting into streaks of orange and bruised lavender across the wide southern sky. The air was thick, still humming with heat, but shadows were beginning to stretch longer across the narrow red dirt road that twisted out of town and into silence. Zaria's sandals slapped against the ground in rhythm with her shallow breaths as she carried Nyla on her back, one arm curled under the girl's legs while the other clutched the worn tote slung over her shoulder. They'd found some wild onions and dandelion greens near the creek, barely enough for a bitter soup, but it would have to do. Nyla leaned forward, her little hands resting on Zaria's shoulders. "Zari, you hear that?" she whispered. Zaria paused. At first she heard nothing. Then a low metallic groan carried faintly through the stillness. Another groan, then a sharp clank. Something, or someone, was struggling. Just ahead, around the bend in the road, there was a car pulled awkwardly onto the shoulder, its hood open like the mouth of some broken animal. A thin wisp of smoke curled from inside, lazy and pale in the dying light. Beside it stood a tall man, sweating through his dress shirt, muttering curses under his breath as he poked aimlessly at the engine with a piece of metal that clearly wasn't meant for the job. Zaria's instinct told her to keep walking. People didn't expect help from girls like her, and when they got it, they rarely said thanks. Worse, sometimes they got mean. But Nyla had already wriggled down from her back, her eyes wide with the reckless curiosity only 7-year-olds carry. "His car's broke," Nyla announced, as if this were some revelation. Zaria stayed quiet, eyes fixed on the man. He hadn't noticed them yet. "We should go," she said softly, but her feet didn't move. That's when the man turned. He was older, 50, maybe older than that, with a sharp face and short gray hair, damp with sweat. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie thrown onto the passenger seat. He looked tired, impatient. "What are you two doing out here?" he barked. "You lost?" Zaria took a breath, then stepped forward. "Your engine's steaming," she said, her voice calm, practiced. He blinked, looked at her like he hadn't quite processed what she said. "Yeah," he grumbled. "Overheated, I guess. I don't know. Piece of junk." She could hear it clearly now, the slight sputter in the idle before it gave out, the clicking sound of the fan struggling to spin. She took another step forward, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off the hood. "Might be your belt," she offered, "or the pump." The man gave a dry laugh. "And you'd know that how?" Zaria opened her bag. Inside were rags, some hand-wrapped bits of wire, 2 old screwdrivers, and a handful of rusted wrenches Ray had tossed out back behind the shop. She held one up. It was pitted and stained, but still good. The man crossed his arms. "You want to take a crack at it? Be my guest." She didn't ask again, just moved forward, eyes scanning the inside of the engine like she'd done a dozen times at Ray's garage. Nyla stood beside her, pulling out tools as Zaria called for them. 3/8, she said quietly. "Flathead. No, the short one." He watched, arms still crossed, an eyebrow raised in vague amusement. "What is this, some kind of game?" Zaria didn't answer. Her hands were already inside the engine, feeling for looseness, listening to the rattle of components. She could see where the belt had come loose and noticed the dried, cracking edges of a hose near the coolant line. "You ran her hot too long," she murmured, mostly to herself. And she didn't like that. He scoffed. "She? You giving my car a gender now?" Zaria didn't flinch. "Most tell you things. You gotta listen." She wiped sweat from her forehead with the edge of her sleeve, then adjusted a clamp and tightened a bolt with a twist that came from memory, not luck. The man stepped closer, now visibly curious. "Where'd you learn all that?" Zaria kept her eyes on the engine. "Someone let me watch. Sometimes they let me try." "Let you?" he echoed. "What, some kind of school thing?" "No," she said simply. "Just Ray's garage." Something in her tone shut him up. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The sun had nearly dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the hood. Finally, Zaria stepped back and brushed her hands on her shorts. "Try it now," she said, voice low. The man slid into the driver's seat with the suspicion of someone playing along with a joke. He turned the key. The engine coughed, then caught, rough at first, then steadier. Not perfect, but running. He stared at the dashboard, like it had done something unnatural. Then he looked up, and they were gone. Zarya had picked up her bag and was already walking, Nyla back on her shoulders, humming softly. The man stood by the car, watching the narrow figures grow smaller down the long, empty road. "Hey!" he called out, too late. Zarya didn't turn. She'd heard the voice. She just didn't believe in what came after. He stood there for a long time, the engine purring behind him, trying to piece together what had just happened. A girl, no older than 13, had fixed his car with junkyard tools and quiet confidence, and she hadn't even asked for his name. That night, sleep didn't come easy for Tomas. He lay on the edge of his hotel bed, fully clothed, staring at the slow-turning ceiling fan above him. The hum of the cheap motor did nothing to drown out the noise inside his head. Every time he shut his eyes, he saw them again. Two little girls, barefoot, caked in dust and sweat, their backs turned as they walked away from his car without a word, like ghosts retreating into the twilight. All night the image haunted him, the older girl's quiet intensity, her grease-streaked fingers working inside the engine like she'd been born for it, and the little one beside her, handing her rusted tools like it was the most natural thing in the world. He hadn't even asked their names. They hadn't offered. They'd appeared, fixed his problem, and vanished before he could process what had happened. And now, long past midnight, lying stiff on the thin mattress of a roadside motel room with peeling wallpaper and a buzzing wall unit that pushed around stale air, the man couldn't stop thinking about them. Not just because they'd surprised him, though they had. It was the way they walked away, that slow, wordless departure that didn't expect a thank you or a second glance. It unsettled him. He'd grown used to a world where everyone wanted something. These girls wanted nothing. That was harder to understand. By morning, the questions had fermented into something heavier. He wasn't sure what he was chasing exactly, but he got into his car and drove back into the heart of the town. The place was already stirring, sun cutting down through the trees, lighting up the dust that floated in the air like old secrets. He pulled into the gas station, the same one he'd passed yesterday without thinking, and stepped out. An older man sat behind the counter, guts spilling over his belt, a newspaper spread across his lap, and a half-lit cigarette dangling between his fingers. "Excuse me," the man said. "I'm looking for two girls. Sisters, I think. Black girls, one older, maybe 12 or 13, the other little. I ran into them yesterday out near Ridge Bend. They helped me. Fixed my car, actually." The attendant didn't lift his eyes from the paper. "You don't want to go digging around there," he muttered. "I'm not trying to bother anyone, just wanted to thank them." The man gave a short, humorless laugh. "You don't know who you're talking about, do you?" He finally folded the paper, revealing a face lined by sun and suspicion. "Those girls, people say they bring bad luck. Trouble follows them around. They show up, stuff goes wrong, cows get sick, pipes burst, power goes out, always something." The stranger frowned. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," the man replied. "Folks round here call them the shadows. You're not from here, you don't understand. You do yourself a favor and forget about 'em." But he couldn't. The idea that these girls, who had asked for nothing and helped him without question, could be spoken of like omens clawed at something deep inside him. He thanked the attendant and left. At the diner, a woman wiping tables shook her head when he asked again. "I know who you mean," she said softly. "Skinny thing with braids and that sweet little sister who never says much. They keep to themselves, always polite. But people talk. Say the older one's cursed. Say she was born wrong." "Wrong?" he asked, trying not to sound angry. "She's too smart," the woman said with a shrug. "Too serious. Looks you in the eye like she's already lived your whole life. That spooks folks. You know how it is." He didn't, actually, but he was starting to. It wasn't just superstition, it was survival. People needed someone to fear so they could feel safe. In this place, two poor black girls who didn't smile on cue were enough to draw suspicion. He asked a few more locals, all with variations of the same story. By midday, someone pointed him toward a stretch of back road that curved around the edge of the woods, saying that's where they usually came from. He followed the path in his car, tires crunching over gravel and broken twigs, until he reached a clearing where the trees thinned and the land opened up just enough to reveal a small house, if you could call it that. It was more shack than home, its wooden frame sagging in the middle like a spine long since broken. A rusted stovepipe poked through a patchwork roof. Empty buckets lined the steps. The silence here was deep, not hostile, but worn out, like the air had given up trying to carry sound. An old woman sat in a crooked rocking chair on the porch, shelling peas into a metal bowl with the rhythm of someone who'd done it all her life. Her eyes were cloudy but alert, tracking him before he even stepped out of the car. He approached slowly, unsure of how to begin. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am," he said. "I think I met your granddaughters yesterday. They helped me. Fixed my car out by the Ridgebend stretch." She didn't answer right away, just dropped another pea into the bowl. Then, in a voice dry as twigs snapping, she said, "You come here to return the favor, or to ask if it was real?" He blinked. "I'm not sure. Maybe both." She looked at him hard, then sighed. "They don't get many thank yous, not around here. People see what they want, hear what they fear." Just then, the sound of feet crunching in the dry grass drew their attention. The girls were coming up the path behind the house, one carrying a bundle of greens and the other clinging to her back, arms wrapped around her neck. The man straightened instinctively. It was them, no mistake. The older girl stopped when she saw him, not startled, not curious, just observant. Her eyes scanned him the way they had the open engine. Calm. Measuring. He opened his mouth but didn't know where to start. "I didn't get to thank you yesterday," he said finally. "You didn't have to help me, but you did." The younger girl tilted her head. "We saw you needed it." The older one didn't say anything, just looked at him like she was waiting for the real reason he'd come. He hesitated. "People here, they say things about you." The girl's expression didn't change. "They always do." He felt something twist inside his chest. "That's not right." "No," she said simply. "But it's normal." He didn't know what to say after that, and maybe that was the point. He'd come here thinking he was doing something kind, bringing closure, offering gratitude, but he was starting to see that he wasn't the one giving anything. He was the one receiving something he couldn't name. He looked at the girls again, thin, dusty, tired but unbent, stronger than he'd ever been. He tipped his head. "Take care of each other," he said quietly. The older girl gave the faintest nod. "We always do." And as he walked back to his car, the voices from town still echoed in his mind, but so did hers. And in the silence that followed, only one of them felt real. He didn't drive far, maybe a mile, just enough to be out of sight of the crooked house and the old woman's steady eyes. But the road ahead blurred, not from the heat this time, but from something deeper, something pressing against his chest in a way he hadn't expected. He pulled over, cut the engine, and sat in silence, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing tethering him to clarity. He'd come to say thank you, that was all. He wasn't here to get involved. He wasn't here to feel anything. But he did. In the stillness of the car, he could hear echoes of the girls' voices, faint but insistent. The little one, bright and unbothered. The older one, cautious but honest, like someone who had already learned how the world measured her worth. He remembered the way she looked at him, not with anger or fear, but with the quiet certainty of someone who expected nothing and was rarely disappointed. He thought of his daughter then, not for the first time. The daughter he'd buried 7 years ago after a car accident that no one saw coming and no one could undo. She would have been about the same age now. He'd packed up her room that winter and never unpacked anything since. She'd loved tinkering with small things, remote controls, model trains, anything she could open and study. He used to call her his little mechanic. He blinked, suddenly aware of how tight his chest had become. It wasn't the grief anymore, it was what he'd done with it. The silence, the comfort, the distance. He had built a world where he didn't have to feel anything too deeply. Until yesterday. He didn't know her name, that girl with the grease on her cheek and the eyes that didn't flinch, but she'd cracked something open. By the time he turned the car around and drove back, the air had shifted. The sky was a little grayer now, thick with the promise of a late summer storm, the kind that came without warning and left the ground steaming. He pulled up slowly, parked near the fence post that leaned like it had given up trying to stand straight. He didn't see them at first. Just the old woman again, this time inside the porch, mending a torn bedsheet with long, deliberate strokes of her needle. When he stepped out of the car, she looked up, not surprised. "Thought you might circle back," she said simply. He nodded once. "I didn't plan to. They never do." I don't know what I'm doing here," he admitted. "Then maybe you're finally doing something real." She set the fabric down and leaned forward slightly. "You ever looked at someone and saw more of yourself than you were ready to see?" His throat tightened. "Yes," he said. He stood awkwardly, searching for words that made sense. "I lost a daughter. Years ago, and I guess yesterday I saw something in that girl that reminded me. Not because they're the same, but because she has that same fire, the same way of carrying things." The old woman's expression didn't soften, but her voice did. "Zaria's been carrying more than she should since she was 9. When her mama passed, she started taking care of Nyla like she'd been born for it. I told her once, 'You can still be a child,' and she looked at me and said, 'Not if someone's got to cook.'" He swallowed hard. "I've done what I can," the woman continued, "but I'm not strong like I used to be. Can't run after 'em. Can't protect them from the way people look at us." He sat on the porch steps, the wood warm beneath him. The storm was closer now. He could smell the wetness in the wind, feel the tension in the air. "I don't live around here," he said slowly. "I own some land a couple hours east. A house that's too big and too quiet. I don't know why I'm saying this, but would you consider, if they ever needed, somewhere else?" She looked at him carefully. "You offering to take them?" "I'm offering to open a door, not take, not steal, just give them a way out, if that's what they want." For a long moment neither spoke. Then the door behind them creaked, and there she was, Zaria, standing with her hand still on the frame. "I heard you talking," Zaria said. He stood, unsure whether to apologize or explain. "I meant everything I said." She nodded slowly. "I believe you." Nyla stepped forward, eyes curious. "Does your house have a garden?" He smiled. "Not yet, but it could." The girl beamed, and Zaria rested a hand gently on her shoulder. Her gaze turned back to him, steady, still unreadable. "People don't just offer things for free," she said. "I know," he replied, "but maybe it's not for free. Maybe I owe you more than you know." Zaria didn't answer, but something in her eyes shifted, just a flicker, like a door cracking open an inch. It wasn't agreement, it wasn't trust, but it was no longer silence. The storm broke just then, fat drops of rain falling onto the porch roof, slow at first, then heavier, filling the air with the smell of earth and copper. The man didn't move. Neither did the girls. They stood there, suspended in something fragile and unnamed, listening to the storm roll in, all of them wondering, quietly, cautiously, what it might wash away. The rain didn't stop for hours. It soaked the earth, carved shallow rivers in the red clay, and beat steady rhythms on the tin roofs of Marlowe's Edge until the whole town felt quieted by it. By the time the clouds thinned and the sun stretched its light once more across the hills, the world had changed just enough for something small, something almost invisible, to shift. He returned 2 days later this time, with no doubt, no excuses. The black sedan rolled slowly up the path, cleaner now than it had been, its tires careful not to spray mud toward the garden of wild greens that had been tied into neat bunches on the porch railing. The house stood the same, leaning and tired, but today it seemed to carry less weight, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Zaria was out front, washing something in a rusted metal tub, sleeves rolled high, a strip of cloth wrapped around her wrist like a mechanic's badge of honor. Nyla sat nearby, barefoot and humming, lining up small stones by size. When the car door opened, neither of them ran. They just paused, lifted their eyes, and watched the man approach like they'd expected him, like they'd already made peace with what was coming next. He stopped a few feet away. The sun lit the side of his face, and his voice was quiet. "If you're still willing, the offer's real." Zarya didn't smile. She rarely did. But she gave him a look that said she'd thought about it, turned it over in her mind like a stone in her palm. "Not just us," she said. He nodded. "Of course." Inside, the old woman was already waiting. She had a bag packed. Not much, just a folded shawl, a small Bible, and a jar of dried beans she'd grown herself. She didn't say much when he offered his arm to help her down the steps, just touched his elbow gently and whispered, "You're not saving anyone, son. You're just showing up." And he understood. The neighbors watched, of course, faces peeked from behind curtains, heads turned slightly at porches up and down the road. No one spoke, no one stopped them, maybe because they didn't believe it was real. Maybe because in a town that worshipped its silence, this departure was too loud to interrupt. The ride was quiet. Nyla pressed her forehead against the window, drawing shapes in the fog left by her breath. Zarya sat still beside her, eyes fixed forward, her fingers curled tightly around the canvas bag on her lap. She didn't speak much, didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She was watching every mile, every turn, memorizing the landscape like a map she might need one day. When they reached the house, the light was starting to fall again, soft and golden across the white gravel drive. It wasn't a mansion, just an old farmhouse, sturdy and simple, with wide porches and an oak tree that reached high above the roofline. Wind chimes clinked gently in the breeze. There were birds, more than they'd heard in years. He led them inside, let them walk through the rooms without guiding their eyes. The living room was open and warm. Wood floors that creaked in the right way, shelves that held dust and stories. There were empty bedrooms upstairs, still quiet but clean, waiting. Zarya stood in the doorway of one, looking at the bed, the small desk by the window. "This was hers?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away, just nodded. "It's been waiting." She ran her fingers over the edge of the desk. "I can fix that drawer," she said. "It sticks." He smiled, but it felt more like gratitude than amusement. "I figured you might." That night he cooked, nothing fancy, fried eggs, grits, some biscuits from a can. But it was hot and there was enough. They sat around the kitchen table with mismatched chairs and dim yellow light from the old overhead fixture. It was quiet at first. Then Nyla laughed at something. No one remembered what. And the sound lingered in the corners of the room like perfume. The days that followed were slow, careful. They moved like people learning to breathe in new air. The old woman planted herbs behind the kitchen. Nyla followed the cats. Zarya fixed a gutter, rewired the lamp in the study, oiled the hinges on the back door. She didn't wait to be asked. She just saw what needed doing and did it, like she always had. But now, someone noticed. One afternoon he found her in the garage, kneeling beside the car, polishing the hubcap with a rag she'd brought from the old house. The same bag of rusted tools sat open beside her. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You know I can get you a new set," he offered. She didn't look up. "These still work." "I know." He hesitated, then said, "You didn't take anything from me that day. You gave me something." Zarya glanced over, expression unreadable. "Like what?" "Like a reason," he said, "to stop looking back." She didn't speak again, just nodded slightly and went back to polishing. As the weeks passed, the town they'd left behind began to forget them. The rumors faded, the whispers dried out. But here, in the place they'd been welcomed, something began to grow, unspoken, unforced, not a fairy tale, not salvation, but a life. And one evening, long after the sun had gone down and the cicadas had started their song, Zarya left a small bundle on the man's desk. Inside it was a folded piece of fabric, a ragged cloth used to wipe down the engine the night they met, and a note written in her tight, careful script. "Thank you for seeing us. Not just stopping for us. Seeing us." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be, and he sat there, the cloth in his hand, the words echoing louder than anything spoken, knowing that somewhere between a broken car and a red dirt road, something had been fixed that neither of them had planned for. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.